information and describes the best ways to use such resources as Google Earth, Google Scholar, Wikipedia, and Wikimedia. He's a practicing scientist. He experiments and analyzes outcomes. He performs field studies and tries to understand what makes Google users tick. Why do some users query Google first and then not click on anything? Why do some Google users only ask one query while others continue on? What is different about their search experiences? This is what drives his work. What do people search for? How do they find it? How do they understand and use what they have found? So help me in welcoming Dan Russell.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you. I have my left. August 6th, 2005 was my second day at Google. And I'm going down the corridors of power at Google, and there's a guy rollerblading towards me. It's Google. So it turns out it's Larry Page, co-founder of Google. He comes toward me at high rate of speed and does a very nice hockey stop right in front of me and says, "You're Dan Russell." And I think, wow, that's great, my second day, and the co-founder knows who I am. Then he says, "Why are you here?" And I think, uh-oh. And so I said, I'm here to understand how people search, what they do. He replied, "Oh, we know how people search. We have the log data. We have all the records and all the databases of what people search for and so on and so on." I said, well, that's interesting. So here it is, 16 years later, and I'm still studying why people search the way they do. Which means either we didn't understand 16 years ago how people searched, or I'm completely incompetent. I think it's the former rather than the latter. So what I want to do, though, is tell you about, as Ginny mentioned, my book, The Joy of Search. And when I first proposed writing this book to my manager, he said, "Sure, but why would you want to write a book? Isn't that 20th century?" And I said, well, look, a book is not just a long tweet. It is something fundamentally different. In this case, what I try to do in my book is to tell stories about how people search and how you can be a better searcher and so on. But more critically, it tries to capture a way of thinking, a kind of epistemology of thought, of curiosity, of the way people inquire about the world. And that's really where this book is. So let me tell you what my real job is, despite what I told Larry. I'm a cyber tribal techno-cognitive anthropologist. What that very sexy title means is that I study how people search, how they think about search, and how they do it in groups, how they do it by themselves, and importantly, how they learn this skill. So I think about this a lot, and I worry a lot about how people think that Google is working for them or not for them. So one of the things I do is also act as a software engineer and a research scientist. And more importantly, I brought a different perspective. I brought this sort of anthropological perspective to Google, which hadn't known what that was before I arrived. So one of the things I do is a lot of studies. So I have done, thousands of studies in the past 15, 16 years, including several hundred field studies. Hundreds of field studies, which is a staggering amount of work if you've ever done one. You go to someone's house, you spend hours with them, you talk with them, you watch them work and so on. I've had people yell at me because Google wasn't doing what they thought. I became Google embodied, which is a really interesting perspective to have. But I've also taught everyone from fourth graders up to NASA rocket scientists. And there are interesting similarities between the two and differences. And in particular, a lot of people believe that digital youth understand how all this stuff works. Let me tell you a big insight. They don't have a clue. They really don't. They're very good at some things, and they are fearless. They are totally happy clicking on settings and redoing stuff and restarting the computer and all that jazz. They have very little understanding of what's really going on. So I do these studies, and I will tell you that people learn how to search mostly from friends. Mostly from friends. But the good news is they learn a little bit from classes, which is why I teach a lot, which is why I wrote the book, fundamentally. People will learn, but the primary mechanism is by watching friends or asking friends for tips. Critical, they remember stories. If I tell you how the site operator works, it's going to go in one ear and out the other immediately. But if I tell you the story, you will remember the story. That's how Dan did it. So I'm going to show you some examples here. Now let me ask first, how many of you have used Google? Just checking, okay? How many of you have used Bing? A few. Oh, wonderful. Ecumenical people. How many of you use Google today? Okay, let's say a third of you. That's good. That's good. It's kind of like a toothbrush activity, something you do every single day, at least I do. But you can ask questions of Google that you might not have thought about. And I'm really interested in what's the mental model that people have of how search works. What can it do? What can you do with it? So for example, you could go to this Google right now and say, what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? And what's the answer? Noel says it's 42. The rest of you have to go read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But the answer is actually 42. Now, technically, that's called an Easter egg, right? That's actually not the true answer. Alex, that's for you. That's actually not the real answer. But you get the idea. There's these interesting behaviors that are inside of Google you may or may not know about. I'll show you some of those. So if you go read the academic literature, and as a practicing academic, I do this, you will find these wonderful papers that describe this complex process of what students do in laboratories when you ask them questions to use Google. They have this vague, inarticulate expression of a search. They then go around, they evaluate the search, they ask for evaluations of credibility, and so on and so on. But let me tell you, this is what people really do. They don't actually do that. They do this. They go boom, 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 right? This is what you do, right? Try something, done, right? It's very rare that people actually go through a reflective process in their search. So how do people think Google works? How is this thing that we've built? We have built a computer the size of a planet. Did you get the manual? We forgot that part, right? And which is why people mostly learn from friends, because there is no manual. So I'm curious, how does it work? Well, more importantly, how do you think it works? Right? Because you don't have to understand, for example, the basics of carburation in order to drive a car. You do need to know that circular thing, when you do that, it goes right. When you do that, it goes left. And that pedal on the right makes it go faster. And the pedal you need to understand that stuff. If you don't, you can't drive. If you don't understand a little bit about Google, you can be much more effective in your searches. So here, for example, if you type in this expression, this arithmetic expression, you get this wonderful three-dimensional model of the expression of the equation. Did you know it could do that? Right? Or here's another one. You've probably seen one of look, quick question. How many of you know what this is? Okay, everybody, 100%. Let me tell you, in a lot of my lectures, I ask that question, nobody raises a hand. Not one person. And, so you understand that's a library card catalog. This is actually from the Library of Congress. I was in the stacks in the sub basement. They still have them down there, mostly for interesting historical archival purposes. But you know how that works. But people think that Google's like this. We have every document, every film, every video, every audio throughout the entire history of the world, 24/7. That's not right. It's not quite right. So what do we have? Well, one of the things I do is I ask students to draw a picture, a mental model, kind of an image, how Google works. And this was done by a computer science student. Pretty sophisticated, kind of right. Queries go out, there's some crawling, there's a database, blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you, this is in the vast minority. Mostly people draw pictures like this. And it's like a bullseye. It says at the top, several overlapping concentric circles, nonlinear Boolean targets. I have no idea what that means. I don't think that student knows what that means. It's kind of word salad at this point. But it indicates that there's something fundamental going on. I have a couple thousand of images like this. It occupies a big stack in my office. A third of all these drawings that I get from students have the word magic on it somewhere, which suggests that we have utterly failed to communicate how Google works, right? So this is interesting because you can ask questions like this. How old is Donald Trump's wife? You could type that into Google, and it will tell you, well, let me ask you, what will it tell you? Melania's age or something, right? Here's what it really does. It gives you 3 answers. Oh, you want the latest one? Key point. Google doesn't think the way you do. In conversation, we have this convention that we refer to the most recent wife or whatever, right? There are a lot of conventions that are baked into our culture that Google does not share. There's no code for that kind of behavior. So how does it differ? So we can ask a question like this. What color is the sky? Prediction. Will Google tell you the answer? Probably. How about a question like this? What color is the sky on Mars? Does Google know? Well, the trick is Google doesn't have to know. Google indexes NASA websites, and NASA websites will tell us that the color of the sky through human eyes is yellow-brown, right? So the question here is, how do you think about what Google can tell you? Are there still difficult questions you can ask, like, what's the population of Japan in 1490? That's difficult. Or how about, how much does the Empire State Building weigh? Why is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea a classic? You see where I'm going? There are kinds of questions that Google has literally no idea about. Or my favorite, how much apartment housing should San Francisco have? Don't ask Google policy questions. You will get results, but I don't know what they're going to be. Right? So it is an interesting time because what can you ask? Could you ask a question like this? Does anybody read this? If you can type that in, and there are lots of people who can type that in, you will find out that that's a query about what's the flag of Ethiopia. So yeah, we handle all these languages, all these character sets. We index content from around the world, including Ethiopian online content. But there are some questions that you might think Google could answer. My son walks in one day with his bite on his arm. Do I need to go to the ER with him? Question. Could Google tell me the answer to this? What kind of bite is that? More important question. There's an app you can buy that will identify mushrooms for you. So it's not a Google app, it's another search app you can buy online for your phone. And it will identify any mushroom instantly. And it has a 4.5 out of 5-star review. Awesome. Note, only survivors evaluate the application. So that review has a huge survivor bias built into it. You need to know that before you trust that mushroom you just picked. So these mental models are super variable. There are people who really do understand some things, mostly computer science guys, and I mean that literally. But a lot of people have no clue, and they type, and their behavior as a consequence is kind of random in many ways. So one of the things I do is a lot of these studies, and the study I did a while ago was I asked 250 software engineers at Google, not just any software engineers, search engineers, the people who built the system for you. I asked 250 of them to find me an aerial photo of this house. This is 900 University Avenue, downtown Palo Alto. It's a well-known house. It's been around since the dawn of time. So I said, can you find me an aerial image of this house taken before 1977? I asked 250 engineers, not one could do this at Google. Okay? I asked 2,000 mechanical Turkers, this population of people who do tasks for you. 1 out of 2,000 could do it. What happened? It's not that hard. What happened is that people have a phenomenon called functional fixedness. Once you frame a question as a Google question, you only use Google search engine. So you miss, for example, little details like, oh, page 33, there's a very nice aerial photo taken in 1934 in this book. Oh, books, I remember those. Do you remember those? Yeah, they're still relevant. Or another one that killed me was this website. There's a very nice website, but lots of people don't think about asking a question like historical aerial imagery or archival aerial imagery. Vocabulary matters. It still matters. So the one, though, that just floored me was that we have this product called Google Earth. Anybody use Google Earth? Anybody know about this? Okay. For those of you who haven't used it, I recommend it's a free download, you just run it. But if you use Google Earth, there's an archival aerial imagery feature in it that almost nobody knows about. It just floors me because we have imagery for the entire Earth and going back decades for almost everywhere, which means that this is an image of 900 University Avenue from 1948. When I ask people at Google this question, how would you do this? 250 of them could not come up with a solution. What have we done wrong? So that's a little bit of a motivation for why I write this book, because you can search for pictures of Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. You get this beautiful imagery, right? But did you know, for example, you could use Google Maps, walk inside the building, and look around on your laptop, right? So part of what I'm doing is kind of giving you some ideas about what Google can do. So what do we need to know? What do we globally, what do we as citizens need to know about accessing and finding information, or evaluating credibility, or understanding sources? So first thing, you need to know what's possible. If you don't know about the capability space, you won't think to frame a question that way. Okay? So I'm going to tell you two stories from my book, chapters 2 and chapter 17. So the second chapter basically asks the question, this is a building somewhere in the world. A friend of mine sends me this photograph and says, Dan, I know you can figure out where that building is. It's not hard. You're a search expert. You can figure it out. No. The question is, what's the phone number of the room where I'm standing when I took the photograph? Right? Could you figure this out? Chapter 2 will tell you. But I'll recap here real quick. First off, you work with first principle. Work with what you have. You don't have a lot in that image, but you do have this logo at the top, which is TP. And so if you search for TP office building, it very quickly takes you to the Telekomunika Polska images, which is downtown Warsaw. Awesome, we figured that out. But that wasn't the question, right? You can also do it by doing an image search for TP, which remarkably enough does not give you images of toilet paper. It gives you this office building. But you can very quickly find out that that office building is 1416 Varda Street, Warsaw. Cool, that wasn't the question. The question was, where's the photographer? What's the phone number? So what do? Well, you could look at these pictures all day long, but let me tell you another thing about Google Earth. Google Earth also has a 3D CAD model of most major buildings, which means that this is Google Earth on the right, that's the image on the left. You can go to Warsaw and fly around, literally fly around, in this image space until the picture aligns with the CAD model, with a computer design model. All I did was I aligned the image in the model from Google Earth with the actual image. What do? They don't teach this to you in computer science classes. They don't teach this to you in library archive search classes. You turn around and look at the building behind you. So when you do that, you'll discover, if you look at the bottom, you actually turn around, there's a big building right behind you, and you look at the bottom, it says Emily Potter, 53. So now, remember, we're looking for the phone number. So you have to recognize, if you look at the original image, it's a little hard to see on this monitor, look at the original image, there's a kind of blur, bluey thing up there. Now you know how to reverse an image, to mirror image it. And once you do that, you go, oh, it's the Google logo reflected in the glass of the office. So now I do a search for the Google offices in Warsaw. There's the phone number and the fax number, should you need that, right? But this isn't to point out that Dan is a clever guy. It's to show you that there are ways, by clicking things together, by linking resources together, by using these techniques that I show you, that you can actually go from this impossible question to a very practical answer. This took me less than 5 minutes to do that, right? So let me tell you story number 2, which is a couple years ago, my wife and I and some friends were traveling through the Aegean, and we visited Delos, the island. It's sort of smack in the middle of the Aegean Sea. And it's hard to see unless when you're in the cheap seats, sorry guys. But this is actually one giant archaeological inventory. It's full of temples and homes of dealers, and it's a fascinating place. Delos is the mythological home of Apollo and Diana. Okay? So naturally, the big draw in the classical age was the temple of Apollo and Diana. It was the big show in town. So we went on shore and we did the tour. And at the very end, the ultimate thing in the tour is this final vista, this final looking at this upturned rock, which is, it turns out, the pediment, the very bottom layer of the temple of Apollo and Diana. Cool, right? You look at it and go, wow, it must have been great. Oh, it's a slab of marble, it's only a few feet thick. But when I was there, I noticed this says M.C. Perry, USN 1826. And I asked the tour guide, is that the same M.C. Perry who went to Japan? And the tour guide said, I don't know what you're talking about. How many people recognize M.C. Perry? Okay, all the historians, wow, everybody, great. Literate crowd. So I saw that and I said, could it possibly be the same person? Well, how would you search for that? You could go to Google and type in M.C. Perry, and is it this guy in 1852 who went to Japan, opened up trade with the West? So you go to Google and you type M.C. Perry, Greece, 1826. Let me tell you, nada, not much. There's just very little content there. I thought, well, that's interesting and strange. I could figure out that he actually was aboard the USS North Carolina. And if you go to Google Books and do that query, not regular Google, just Google Books, you will not find what you think you want, but you will find this, which is the guide to the Northern Federal Archives and Manuscripts, United States relating to Africa. I think, what? It turns out this is an archive guide. It told me that the logbook for the USS North Carolina was in, which looks like that, was in a library, in an archive, which is, there we go, in Wilmington, Delaware, the Hagley Archive. So I go there, and the archivist is very nice. I say, can I look at the logbook? Sure. So this is after looking through the logbook of the USS North Carolina, 1826. This says, Delos, at 7 hour, we are running along the south side of Delos. I think this is awesome. But did they get off the boat? I don't know. How would you tell? So I know that there are often multiple copies of logbooks. So I look around a little bit more and I find there are 2 more copies in the world. One at the Eleutherian Library in Chapel Hill and one at the Library of Congress. So I go to Chapel Hill, it's a copy, no surprise. So I go to the Library of Congress, it's the archive room, and you might have been here. Nice space, you make your little requisition on the slip, send it off, and 20 minutes later, a couple of boxes come back, and so this is my desk right there with the boxes, one of which contains the logbook. And damn it, it's exactly the same. It's a copy. Right, done by some poor midshipman in 1826, rather than a Xerox machine. In any case, I'm sitting at that desk looking rather despondent, and the archivist comes by, sees me looking sad, and says, young man, which tells you how old he is. Just he says, young man, what's the problem? And I said, well, I described my problem. He said, oh, I'm sorry. You don't want the logbook, you want the letters. Letters? What do you mean letters? I learned from the archivist that ships of the line in those days, when mail would go out, some poor midshipman would copy every letter that went off ship, and he put it in a file with the captain. So if you wrote to your girlfriend or spouse in DC, Bob, the midshipman, would copy the letter and put it in the file. So when the ship docks, a couple years later, the complete copy of the archive gets filed. Fabulous. So I pick up the letters and I'm scrolling. Interesting, the sidebar comment, scroll. What does it mean to scroll? It means usually to move the bar, right? Scroll. Remember those long documents that you would roll up? It's wonderful we have this sort of anachronistic language to describe modern technology. But anyway, I ended up getting the letter. There we go. That's the logbook I'm looking at. It's exactly the same. Did you think about the letter? And that's the letter from the captain to his wife, Minerva. And I learned how to read this scraggly script, which was a real trick. And then I won't make you read it, but I will read the last sentence there, which is, I have at this time aboard the North Carolina as many relics of one kind or another as would load 10 wagons, and among them number 2 white marble altars from the temples of Apollo and Diana. So they got off the boat, and they stole a bunch of stuff. Right? This is Greece's story, right? So the Americans come in, they steal, or the Brits come in and steal a bunch of stuff. So they stole the temple, basically. They stole the altars. So, smoking gun. They got off the boat, they stole a bunch of stuff. Yeah, that's it. So it was M.C. Perry. He was a lieutenant on that boat. He went ashore and left his mark, literally. So there are a bunch of points here I can make, but what I'd like to do is to tell you that there are a bunch of lessons to learn here. First off, and especially for students, not everything is on the internet. Sometimes you gotta go to the library. Sometimes you gotta go to the archive, because this stuff is never gonna be digitized. Not in my lifetime, not in yours, not in my kids. So sometimes you have to go do this and learn things. And so the real basic question here is, I think for a lot of us, is what do you need to know about being a good searcher, about being a good researcher, about being literate with the tools that we have in the digital age, right? So let me tell you one skill. The book is full of more skills, but this is one that when I discovered this, just deeply, deeply surprised me. I was doing a field study with this young woman who lives less than 1 mile from Apple headquarters in Cupertino, right? She's a local, she's a digital native, whole 9 yards. So we're talking, and I finally figure out that she doesn't know how to use find text on a page, okay? How many of you know how to find text on a page, okay? Okay, the rest of you, pay attention. I'm going to change your life. So this is commonly known as Command F on a Macintosh or Control F. And what it does, when you type Control F, it pops up a little dialog box, and you can type something in there, and it will jump to that point on the page, right? So I found this astonishing. I went home that night, and I told my wife, you know, I met this person who doesn't know how to find text on a page, doesn't know Control F. And she said, what's Control F? And that was a deep, insightful moment for me because she's very smart. And I thought, and then she goes on to tell me even better. She says, you know, I don't know it. I bet my friends don't know it. And sure enough, they don't know it either. If you're a researcher and the world smacks you in the face like this, you pay attention. Because I then did a bunch of studies, and here is one of the studies I did. I asked a bunch of people in this document, this is a web page, it's a list of 10K times, race times. And I said, okay, how long did Beth Smith take to run this race? Just tell me the answer, put it in the form, and we'll go from there, right? And so when you do that, this is the chart. And this is one of those charts you look at and go, oh my goodness. Because a lot of people are over here in this very short time. They spent 10, 15 seconds to find Beth Smith's time. Awesome. What are these poor people doing? This over here on the far right, that's 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Nobody's got that kind of time, right? I will tell you, there are people who are over here on the chart who spent 30 minutes searching for it. And the data that just really, really surprised me is once you get beyond 2 minutes, a quarter of the answers are wrong. They're wrong? How is that possible? Well, I'll tell you, people who don't know Control F also don't know how to copy paste. And so when they finally find the time, they go back and they type it and they swap 2 digits or something. So this really surprised me because it meant that there's a kind of a fundamental skill. Because if you know this, if you know Control F, go to the webpage, Control F, Beth Smith, boom, the answer is right there. Less than 2 seconds, right? Now, the really startling thing about this is once you know this, and now you all know it, it improves your search speed by 12%. So however long you're spending on Google now, I have just subtracted 12%, right? I have increased your accuracy by 25%. This is non-trivial stuff. We have, by just teaching people this one skill, massively increased people's ability to search. I did a survey. I couldn't believe this. I couldn't believe what my wife told me, but she's right. 12,000 people I surveyed. 90% of the US internet using population does not know this fundamental skill. That means 9 out of 10 random people who use the internet in the US don't know how to find text, right? If you ask a bunch of people, you get the same kind of result. But what I think is so interesting about a lot of these studies that I do is that it reveals the mental models that people have or don't have of search. So you also have to understand, and as any good anthropologist would tell you, you have to understand cultural conventions. And a lot of the culture of our time is built around the genres and the media and the types and so on. So for example, do you know about spoof sites? How many people know about spoof sites? Couple? The rest of you, I'm going to change your life. Right? That's number 2 today. Okay, a spoof site is an intentionally funny site. Okay? So you might have seen this site, the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. It was built by a teacher as a spoof site. I guess I should frame this by saying, there's no such animal. This animal is completely fictitious, does not exist, right? The teacher who built this website did so as a way of teaching his students credibility assessment. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Total failure, right? Every year, thousands of students across the web write learned articles about the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. It's a spoof, right? Here's another one. This is probably my favorite spoof site of all time. The dihydrogen monoxide FAQ, which is basically a website about dihydrogen monoxide. And if you remember your basic chemistry, which you do, I'm sure, dihydrogen, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, that's water, H2O, right? So this is a website dedicated to telling you all the terrible things that happen when you ingest dihydrogen monoxide. Overconsumption leads to death. That's true. It's typically called drowning, right? So the point is that this is a well-known, in my circle, spoof website. But there's a city in Los Angeles. When they saw this website, they banned the importation of dihydrogen monoxide into their city. The city council did this. Of course, when the water department found out about it, they said, what? What are we going to do? So you've got this real problem. People don't know what a spoof site is. They don't know how to evaluate it. And so there's an interesting question for us at Google about how do we evolve the capabilities of what you can ask and the ways you can ask. And how do we teach that? So, for example, my son, when he was 16, was a real Stanford basketball fan. And so we'd go to these games. And what would happen is you would get 1,000 drunken fans singing a song like this. Do you know this song? Okay, so my son says to me, Dad, what do I do? How do I get this song on my phone? Because I want to hear it. I think about it and I go, well, I don't know. Maybe we could use one of these applications that will identify songs from the soundtrack that you hear, right? Like Shazam. Well, except that only works with digitally recorded copyrighted material. It doesn't account for 1,000 drunken Stanford fans chanting, oh, 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 right? So I'm thinking, and I think, I work at Google, I can figure this out, right? And I think, I know, we'll do lyrics search. What are the lyrics? Oh, 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 oh. And so I said, son, give up. My son, being my son, turns to Google and types in oh, 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 oh. I don't know if you can see it, but the first hit there is the song. So dumb dad didn't understand something about the way Google worked. And I did a little investigation, and I discovered that there are lots and lots of question answering sites on the web, what are called QA sites, question answering. And if you go visit them, some of them will say, what's that song that goes, oh, 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 and then the answer is, it's Zombie Nation, right? It's the name of the song. So Google figured that out. I needed an update, and I bet you need an update. And in fact, I think we all need updates about how these things work. So I think we need to know how to search deeply and effectively. In some sense, being an effective citizen today requires this. You cannot just read the internet blindly. That's a recipe for disaster. But I've been doing research recently on how people search for COVID vaccine information. You want to know how many people search for validation or disconfirmation information about COVID vaccines? 0.01% per day. That's a trivial number. These people are not searching for validation information about that. How can we change that? That's what the book is all about. It's basically trying to give you ideas and stories, these fundamental nuggets of cognitive knowledge that will allow you to be a better searcher. That's my goal, and that's why I wrote the book. So if you want to contact me, you can read my blog where I write about this every week, this kind of thing every week. I have a website with a lot of stuff on it. I post on Twitter every week or so. And if you want to contact me, thejoyofsearch.net. Because I think this stuff is super important. It is not optional. You have to know about the internet. I remember when a few years ago, a senator said, I don't know about this internet stuff. I'm sorry, that's not okay. It's not okay for us as citizens. It's not okay for us as parents. It's not okay for us as people who are active readers. We need to be better searchers. We need to be deeper understanders of these things. Thank you.
Questions?
This woman has all the power in the world.
Is this on? Kurzweil, who works for Google.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll take this off for a second. He created something, it's about books.
Yep.
And you can go, and I have it, I've got it bookmarked. And you can go onto that and say, how do you cook fettuccine or something like that? How do you, what's the site and how do you use that better?
Here's a big tip. Never remember a URL. It's a waste of time. I don't have enough neurons for all that stuff. I would just search for it. I would search for Kurzweil book Google, right? Something like that. You're right.
But then the question is, how do you use that even better?
Right. I don't really know. And the reason is interesting because what he did was basically run a kind of natural language processing algorithm over the corpus of books. the content of all these books, right? And we've got 20 million books or something. And he basically then built a question answering front end, which is what you're talking about. How do I cook fettuccine at 5,000 feet or whatever, right? Because it's different there.
What's the most famous quote by?
Yeah, you can ask questions like that. So what happened, he did that 4 or 5 years ago now. And the rest of Google has kind of caught up to that. So that's a lovely kind of old-fashioned, anachronistic way of doing things. I know I'm saying that in the scope of 4 years, but most of Google now has that capability. Because this has been one of the big changes of Google in the past, say, 10 years. Certainly since I joined. When I joined, you had to speak Googleese. You had to type few words, short, to get to the point. Now you can blather on and ask long questions, and it will actually give you decent answers. So the short answer is skip it.
If I want to do a clandestine search, is there some way that I can keep Google from archiving my search commands?
Yep, absolutely. All browsers, all modern browsers have what's called incognito mode, okay? So if you're in Chrome, for example, you go to the top, and I think the tab is called File, and you open one that's called Incognito Window. If you open an incognito window, there's a little icon in the upper right corner that says, we're not listening, we're not doing anything, and so nothing gets cached, nothing gets tracked. So all browsers, Edge supports that, Safari, Firefox, Opera, so on and so on. They all do that. That's the way to do it. So if you want to, take over a government, that's the way to find out. Use incognito mode. Yes?
Permanently stay on that?
Pardon?
Can you permanently stay on that incognito?
Yeah. We don't care. Yeah. If you want to do that, incognito mode. I'm just trying to remember exactly what it is. It does not, the query does not go anywhere into the logs. So for example, I can't see it. I will tell you that incognito mode is used roughly for 1% of queries now. So it doesn't affect our fundamental bottom line anyway. But more power to you if you want to use it. Go for it. Yeah.
We have time for just one more question.
Okay, one more question. Good one.
Yeah, can you tell a very quick story about how I can avoid the first 500 hits being advertisements for whatever I'm looking for?
So I can tell you that, but I will tell you a piece of data. There are never more than 4 advertisements on a page. It may feel like more than that, but that's why I'm a cognitive anthropologist. I look at all the perceptual aspects of this. So in fact, you will never get 500 advertisements anywhere. You can't get more than 4, right? And in fact, we only show ads on 1/3 of all pages. So if you do 9 queries in a row, 3 of those results pages will have ads, and the other 6 will not.
Can I follow on?
Follow up.
Is that after the first 3 that say ads,
Yeah.
then it's the top 10 best,
Right.
which
Right.
are still ads?
No, that's not true. They may feel like ads. They are, in fact, the best results with respect to your query. So something fundamental to know is you cannot pay for position in Google, right? It's not true of all search engines, but you can do a lot to make better and better content, and then you will get ranked higher. Okay, but the first result, or what we call organic result, is not an ad. It may be the same as an ad, but that's because that's a really good result for that query. If you do a query like speedboats, Sonoma County, the first organic result is probably going to be a speedboat seller somewhere in the county, right? And that probably will be an ad as well. So organic results and ad results are very different. We don't talk to those guys. We have a firewall between us. So we actually don't even know if we're duplicating stuff up there, okay? So that's an important thing. You cannot pay for organic result position, right? And there's never more than a few ads per page.
It still gets in the way of actual information. There's no way to say, I want the information, not.
Well, it's an interesting trade-off, right? Because it's a free service. We got to get paid somehow because we're running this, as I said, a computer the size of a planet. If you don't do something, if there's not some revenue stream, then you can't do the service. It's like a newspaper, exactly. Remember, newspapers used to run ads on the front page? Yeah? It's one of those fundamental trade-offs.
That's why
Okay.
have to get better at searching and better at
Yeah, exactly. For what it's worth, I rarely see ads, but I do obscure searches. So, anyway, thank you again for coming. It's so early. Thank you.